Everyone, thanks again for tuning into the Ideation Podcast. My name is Charles Lee, and I am super excited that I invited my friend Angie Richey to the show today. She is the president of Life Pacific University. She has worked in numerous roles at the university prior to her presidency, including VP of Enrollment and Chief Communication Officer, in addition to being a longtime professor. Angie is also a licensed marriage and family therapist specializing in psychodynamic and family systems therapy. She has specialties in several areas, including strengths-based education and emotional health and wellness. Angie, thanks so much for spending a few minutes with our audience.
Thank you, Charles. Such a joy to be here. So much fun. Great way to start my day.
Well, first of all, let me kick it off by just saying congrats on your recent appointment as president of Life Pacific University. That's quite an honor and responsibility.
I am honored and trying to be very responsible for sure in this season.
Well, you've built quite a remarkable reputation for yourself. I don't think I've ever met anyone who knows you that has not been impressed by how you lead. Love to talk to you about how you lead, how you think about leadership. I know, given your background as a licensed therapist, I also want to dive into areas of mental health. But as the college, as a university president, also want to talk to you a little bit about the future of education. So there's several different buckets I'd like to explore with you. And you being a dynamic person, I thought you would be the perfect person to talk to about this. Now, let's start with your leadership. I mean, when you think about leadership, and I think, I've watched you probably for a couple of decades now. I know we went to school together, and now you're working at the university and leading the university. How much of leadership, in your opinion, do you think is nature, like you're born with it, or is it nurture, or is it a combination of both? Where do you stand on that perspective?
Where do I land? Charles, I really do believe it's a combination. I'm a firstborn, so if you're firstborn, that is both a little bit of nature and it's a lot of nurture, because firstborns tend to be more on the responsible side, and really by default, they just had to. All of a sudden, you're taking care of your siblings, and no one asked if you wanted to.
Mm-hmm.
So as a firstborn, I think that it started that way. Temperament-wise, as I grew up, I think I was more on the observant side. I recently went through a scrapbook of mine, and I found a note from my kindergarten teacher to my parents, and it says, "Angie needs to work on confidence." I felt so sad for that little girl. But I think I was on the quiet side. But, the research out of Harvard, Sean Aker, his Science of Happiness research is phenomenal. But he talks about that 50% of our happiness quotient factor is personality, it's temperament. And 40% is really the unknown. It's the variable of intentional activity. And then the last is circumstance. So if you apply that to leadership, I think a lot is learned. And I have had to step up to the plate. Viktor Frankl has this great quote, and it says, "When you are unable to change your circumstances, you're forced to change yourself."
That's good.
And when I was 16, my dad had passed away, and I was the oldest, and we just step into those roles. We just do. And I realized I could either struggle and flounder, or I could step up to the plate. And so a lot of that came out of situations where I had to rise to the occasion. And I could say probably most people that are listening today say, I get that. It maybe wasn't my nature, but circumstances forced me to rise to that leadership occasion. And so I've spent my life learning how to lead and watching others and reading everything I can, because I think ultimately leadership is about influence.
Right.
It's not power. It's how do I serve? How do I help? How do I lead myself? And so I'm an internal locus of control person. I believe that we get to choose, and we can learn anything. So
That's so good. Well, you came into the role last year, and pretty immediately after, the world kind of gets turned upside down. So when you think about great leadership or great leaders, and you've probably seen many in your own life, whether personally or from a distance, what type of character traits do you think makes a great leader?
Number one is humility. I think humility is necessary because someone who's humble is always learning. And I think, again, when we think about COVID-19, we think about what we've entered into, we haven't gone this way before. So having to be very open, having to be vulnerable. Brene Brown's research is amazing because vulnerability opens the pathway to connection and learning and growth. So humility, I think a second characteristic is the ability to lead yourself.
Yeah.
We can't lead from outside ourselves. It has to be who are we? How are we becoming who we want to be? How are we optimizing our health? How are we managing our emotional state? So because we bring ourselves to leadership, so that would be a quality is self-leadership. I think another thing for me is communication. John Maxwell has a great quote. He says, a leader is one who knows the way, goes the way, shows the way. So we may not know the way, but we can learn the way. But we have to go the way. It means we have to model and we have to show the way. So communication. I think in times of unknown, we may not have all the answers, but we have to stay connected. And our teams need to see us engaged. They don't need to see us crying and freaking out. That's not a good leader. Okay. Yeah. They need to see strength and confidence, but they need communication. And I think to my last point, I would say what I just said, confidence, assuredness, that leaders have to have an optimism and a belief that anything is possible and that we can get through it. That's the only way that we will help our teams move forward, is having that confidence. And if we can't get that confidence, we have to find people that have it and glean from them. So those are some of the qualities.
Yeah. No, that's great. I mean, when I think about what I've seen in your life is the ability to lead, the ability to motivate others. And in the midst of that, you're a clear communicator. But I mean, I don't know if you would come out and say it, but most people consider that even though you have the sense of confidence, there's just like a nice, almost paradoxical mix of humility into it. And so, becoming a president of any company or organization or institution, especially like an academic institution, I know takes lots of rounds of conversations, navigation, your credentials. There's so many people in the decision-making process. I'm sure over the years and getting into this role right now, it always hasn't been an easy road. And then on top of that, I think, even if it's just at an implicit level, there are some barriers of, if you look at all the statistics of female leaders getting into places of that level of leadership, there are these like almost unspoken barriers. Tell us a little bit about the journey to this role and why you even agreed to pursue it. And what was that time like leading up to actually getting this role as president?
What a weird journey. I graduated high school wanting to be in education, and I just love the education process. I love the process of transformation of people becoming more than they ever thought they could. And for me, education has opened doors. It's increased confidence, competency. I've made best friends. I've established the way I think. I've been open to new ideas. So I just love education. Did I ever think I'd lead a university? No way. There was also this sense of purpose. And I remember people asking me, Angie, what do you love? What do you want to do? And all I could really say, it literally in high school to college was, I love people. I love people. I believe in them. And I love to bring people together. I didn't have language that I have now about who I am. In high school, I wish I had the Enneagram, right?
Yeah.
I wish I knew the Myers-Briggs. I wish I knew StrengthsFinder and all of those tests, because I didn't have language to define who I was, which would have made my choices easier. But I went into education, master's degree in education, master's degree in marriage family therapy, counseling. And what I found was that people were at the center of it. And I wanted the quickest way to influence. And education was great, but then therapy was even more, because then I could get into the real stuff of people.
Right.
But I think if my pathway to here, I believe, is truly two things: relationships, because I'm highly relational and I love to make friends and I love to network and I love to grow. And number two, breaking through any limiting beliefs that I think
Mm.
where that would say I can't do something. Maybe it's because I lost my dad at an early age. I stepped up and kind of carried that. I'm going to introduce kind of maybe an interesting conversation, but I have the feminine energy, but I also have masculine energy,
Yeah.
which is that I'm bold, I'm feisty, I'm petite. I'm 5'1", and maybe I think I can get away with more, right? I can take the hard things. I'm an Enneagram 8, wing 7, so I have that challenger in me.
Yeah.
But this deep love for people, which I think has removed barriers for me. I think we can't underestimate the power of likability. I mean, think of Dale Carnegie. The whole book is, how to win friends and influence people. That likability factor matters. And I've just been able to make friends. And that I think that's been helpful to me into breaking barriers. I will say the pathway has led me to higher education and working with people and working in roles that I didn't think that were really hard, honestly. Recruitment, enrollment, sales, it's scary, it's stressful. But every day that I drive home on the 210 crying about, I have to learn this thing and I can't do this, I'd be like, by the time I got to Pasadena, I was literally like, Lord, thank you
Mm-hmm.
for pressing me. Thank you for challenging me. Thank you for it. This hurts so good because I know you're going to use it in me. And Charles, I will tell you, keeping it very basic, I will continue throw myself in terrifying situations to change me and to help me overcome the fear in my life, which I always tell people I do everything afraid, but I'm also bold. I mean, it's really paradoxical, right?
Yeah.
But challenging me in marketing, in sales, in communication. Tony Robbins says when he started his career, he, instead of doing 5 presentations a day, he would do 10. Why? Because he knew he sucked. And the only way you're going to get better is doing it over and over and over again. And so, I believe in people. I believe that people can go anywhere if they're willing to be vulnerable and to work hard and to fail a lot and learn from mistakes. So my path has been interesting. I'm very tenacious, and I cannot deny the fact that I have a rock star husband of 26 years who is a high level leader. I mean, he's like alpha, and he is a strategist. I'm the activator. He's a strategist. He will not let me hold back.
That's so good.
He won't. He won't let me stand down. He won't let me stand back. So he pushes.
That's such a gift. I mean, and you've done that at a staffing level as well. You have a knack for finding really good talent, empowering their passions, and creating, I think, this unique culture of ownership at a level that most other institutions may not have. And so take us through the process of, like, when you think about seeing talent and potential and working with them, how do you develop people you oversee in leadership?
Okay, so I think people can learn skills, but a state, an attitude of humility, a state of hunger. Charles, I can't work with people that aren't hungry. Because you can't only, I mean, you'll spend all your time trying to fuel them. And what I learned as a therapist is you can never work harder than your client. So I am not afraid to pour in, to give everything I can to orient, to support, to value, to challenge any staff member. But if they don't have intrinsic motivation and a fire and a hunger to grow, I can't work with that. I can work with someone who's hungry and not skilled, but I can't work with someone who's skilled and not hungry. Period. I think a level of humility as well. And yeah, unique competencies. But that hunger is absolutely essential, that attitude to win, that growth mindset versus fixed mindset. I just love working with people that want to grow and learn and go for it. And we can produce outstanding results with a team like that.
That's good. So one of the areas that you've been very successful in is really paying attention to your team's emotional health as well as wellness. What are some things that you would advise other leaders on how to, not just get the job done, but also take care of the team that you've been entrusted with?
Okay, this is so important. And I think as a leader, one of the ways that I lead is I do bring in emotional health and emotional intelligence. Brene Brown had a recent article that came out, I think in April. It was in Inc. and a couple other, I don't know if it was the Atlantic, but she said how to have emotionally intelligent Zoom meetings.
Mm,
And she said she starts out with a check-in, a
yeah.
word or phrase, whereas instead of like, how are you? You really break it down and say, be very practical. A word or phrase to describe, how you're feeling in this moment. I've been doing that for years because of my work as a therapist. She comes from that background as well. And you have to meet employees where they are. So I always, whenever I hold a meeting, I ask, where are you at? Get a word or phrase. It could be hungry, it could be exhausted, it could be inspired, it could be energized, whatever. And there's no wrong answer. And then two, I said, what's our intention for the meeting?
Mm,
So one is we clear up that we are validated in being who we are and where we are, but also we focus on what is the goal of the meeting. And if there are any barriers, we can get to that before we get to the goal of the meeting. One thing I also do to care for my team is I introduce them to all the assessments that I love. So
yeah.
I want everyone to I want everyone to know their Enneagram. I
Yeah.
want them to know who they are in health and who they are in stress,
Yeah.
because we can have conflict in the workplace if we're in stress, and we have to acknowledge, okay, I'm in stress, and how do I de-stress? So not only self-awareness, which is the first core competency of emotional intelligence, which is so important for the workplace. We know companies spends millions of dollars
Mm-hmm.
on EI training, but helping them know themselves. So once they know themselves, then, the Myers-Briggs Strengths Finder, then they know everyone else. And that others awareness is equally important to self-awareness, because when I hire someone, I'm like, I need to know who you are right away, so I
Yeah.
know how to speak your language. So that has really produced emotional health, because people know when they're not doing well, and they know, okay, it's time for some nature. It's time for some connection. It's time for to optimize my health and maybe get
Yeah.
more sleep and eat better. So it's kind of just who I am, Charles. And I just decided that if I'm going to take this presidency role, the board knew this, because my last interview, I just said, I'm going to give it everything I've got. I'm going to be myself. I wanted them to know who they were getting. And I'm bringing Angie Richey to the presidency. I have a lot to learn. I know a lot of things in higher education, but I'm going to bring my soul. I'm going to bring how I live. I'm going to bring that emotional integration, and we'll see what happens. So far, so good. But you know what? Time will tell if I'm successful or not.
I love it. I'm sure you'll be fine. So let's talk about higher education itself. In preparation for this conversation, I was reading several articles on what other university presidents were thinking about the future of their universities and institutions. And it's kind of like all over the map, and understandably so. Like there is no like solid formula on how to move forward per se. So in your mind, given how our world is today in 2020, how is this impacting, from your conversations? And I asked for a couple of reasons. One is I'm just curious about the topic, but I also have a junior in high school at home right now, trying to figure out his path to college. How is this all informing your work, and what are you hearing from other leaders of institutions?
Oh, isn't this the craziest season? My first year, and here we are. I had to send everyone home in March. We had to mobilize
That's
a
so
faculty
unreal.
100% online.
Yeah.
We mobilized success coaches. We transitioned staff that would normally do other things face to face to success coaches to get our
Mm,
students to the end. They did a remarkable job. But I've had a college student as well. He is in his last semester of his senior year next year,
mm,
and what a roller coaster. I mean, these students lost so much, and their future seems so unstable, insecure. So there's a lot of things we're considering. I think the challenge is, California just came out a couple weeks ago. The UC's made an announcement that 23, their universities will go online in the fall. Then you
mm,
have all the privates that are saying we're going to stay on campus in the fall. So it's all over the map. For us, we've done a couple things. One is we want to make sure we're following guidelines,
mhm,
CDC, public health officials, but we also have a student population that wants to return to school. And I don't know if your son feels that. I mean, this thought of like going online and not seeing my friends and not having, you're an athlete, Charles, you and your family
yeah,
love
yeah,
sports. I mean, that's been so sad. So, well, I can say for the private universities, most of our intention is going forward, and that is across the board,
Mm.
United States, all over the private universities. And a lot of us have a lot of options because for us, we're smaller, so we
Mm-hmm.
can social distance. We're more nimble, so we can change class times. We can work,
Yeah.
be creative. So that's what we're doing right now. We have 2 task forces, and we're looking at, how do we work with academics and make sure students can graduate and they get not only the classes they need, but the quality of education. I
Right.
think that's going to be the challenge. How do we make online truly effective, enriching, and all that? So that's where we're working on the pedagogy, making sure that that experience is good.
That's really good. I know this is the first time that I can recall both our kids are like, we miss school.
Oh, yeah. Now they know now they can be grateful. It's like, I told you so. So they thought being home would be great, but then they're with parents. I talk to parents all the time, and I have to remind them to be empathetic towards their students. Their
Yeah.
students, if your parents on this call right now, listen, your kids have lost a lot. They've
Mm.
lost their friends, their celebrations, their sports, and now they're home, and you guys are trying to control them. Wait, they didn't have to do chores at noon. They were at lunch with their friends. Now they're doing
Yeah.
what's on earth for that. So I think just helping to have empathy and helping them through the grief process. But I think, Charles, the future is unknown. I think that this, you're an innovator, you're an ideator, that crisis really breeds innovation. It
Yeah.
thrives in crisis. So we have moved light years in a matter of months because we had to.
That's
So
great.
online, YouTube Live, online courses, flexibility. I think our staff realized, and most higher ed universities realized that, higher ed is very fixed. It's very established
Right.
process. No one's got time for that anymore.
Yeah.
We
Yeah.
got to blow things up and innovate for the future
Yep.
of our students.
That's great. So let's talk about, people who are, say, some will label them Gen Z, others will label them, I think some of them are self-labeled founders, and people, most would agree, like under 24-ish or so, down to teenagers. So when you think about that generation, I mean, wow, what an experience of unprecedented disruption, reimagining, but they seem so resilient. And I just see our kids, and they're just kind of rolling with the punches, and they're like, hey, this is just what we have to go through. When you think about this particular generation, and I know within there are probably micro generations and such, but how is this new generation, like, what are some of your thoughts about, like, how they think, what they value, how this is reflected in some of their behavior? I mean, you've definitely seen them as a professor, university president, but I know many are interested from even like a business perspective, like if you're selling retail products and trying to cater to the needs of this kind of emerging group, or even if you're a parent, like what are some things that run through your mind when you think about this new generation of young people really hopefully will kind of stand up and take leadership and lead all of us forward?
Charles, I could not be more excited about Generation Z. I mean, they really are in early, maybe preschool up to 24.
Yeah.
So some people would say cradle to college. They're our entire next gen population, and they are the largest generation around the world. So they will become culture
Hmm.
and lead culture in the coming years. So I am so excited about them. And maybe I'm biased because I'm a parent of Gen Zers, and
Yeah.
I just adore them. They are entrepreneurial. They are creative. I'm sure your kids too. My kids are so resilient right now. They're not afraid.
Mm.
They're not afraid of the future. They're ready to get back at it. I mean, me and my husband, we asked them the other day, does this change the way you view the world and your future? Are you afraid to go back to school? Are you going to be inhibited in how you connect with others? And they're like, not at all. Not at all. I was like, I love you guys. I love you guys. So they're entrepreneurial. They are innovative. I know at the earliest ages, my daughter was cooking. I mean, 6 years old, she's a foodie. My son is all building video games. I know your kids are super creative. So it's, entrepreneurship and creativity is in their DNA. They're also very creative with education. They're YouTube generation. They are hack schoolers. Google's their mama, right?
Yeah.
Anything you want to know. And so they're highly adaptable. They're the first, digital native generation. They're inclusive. They want everyone to win. They just advocate for each other, and they care about causes. If you give this generation something to believe in, they'll go the distance, but you have to inspire them. So I love this generation. I think the future is really bright. I love educating them. They're easy to move the needle. I've worked with them from a professor level. I spoke at 6 youth camps, probably spoke to over 1,000 students last summer. And I've had many teens as clients. And what's amazing is, I would say one of the biggest challenges with this generation that we know from the research of Jean Twenge from the University of San Diego, as well as the news, you'll hear it everywhere, is this generation is facing one of the biggest mental health crises of generations. But we have to also understand we introduced the iPhone, the smartphone. And so technology has changed brains. So they live with so many cognitive distortions.
Yeah.
All or nothing, or everything's catastrophic in the news, and everything is big, and they're not coping well because they're going on their phone to cope, and they're not communicating. But let me tell you, what's so amazing is you get them one-on-one, or you get them in the therapy room or in a classroom, and you begin helping them with their self-concept. You teach them who they are. You help them understand their Enneagram, their techniques, why they're struggling, why their trauma, because what they saw at 5 years old has messed their brain up. When you begin defining reality, the walls come down, because they want you to know that you know. They want you to know that you get the struggles they face. Now, they don't act like they're struggling, but they are numbing out, because what's coming at them is so much. Shootings, Instagram, accessible pornography, violence is so much, they're numbing out. And so when you tell them, I know, and I'm sorry for what you've had to experience. I'm sorry you got that iPhone at 5 years old with no protections because your parents didn't have a clue. It's not that we just are all learning.
Yeah.
They melt, and they melt, they cry, they thank you. And I can move the needle. I can take someone from an anxiety 12, level 12 anxiety, to a 3 in a matter of few sessions by helping them define reality and helping them see themselves in a different way. I just think we need more people meeting the needs of this generation and tuning in to the future of the world, because they are phenomenal.
It's so good. Well, in your private practice, over the years, you've helped a wide spectrum of individuals navigate life challenges, whether at home or work or some other circle of life. But, definitely right now, people are carrying a lot, and they may not know that they're carrying a lot on their shoulders. You could kind of see, like, we're hearing more stories of even like leaders of companies and entrepreneurs and creatives that are sometimes lashing out on team members that they had never lashed out on before. And they didn't even know it was in them. And so what we're seeing is people are, of course, trying to survive, but they're still trying to thrive. And so when you're talking to somebody, knowing that you could probably presuppose most people are overwhelmed, whether they show it or not to some level, what kind of advice do you give people on like how to maintain some type of level of healthy perspective so that not only do they survive, but they can even thrive through this type of season?
Charles, that's such a great question, because this is what the season's been for me, talking with staff and employees and leaders. In my private practice, I really, the population I have served over the years have been executives and peak performers and leaders and pastors. And so I would say the first month was them all feeling incredibly disappointed in themselves, unproductive, guilty, because And what I had to introduce was the grief and loss curve. The Kubler-Ross is it, the denial, right? The shock and
Yeah.
denial, the frustration, then all of a sudden anger, and then we get into the depression, which is the longest phase. And then you start to see the light and you get into acceptance. Well, entrepreneurs and leaders, they had to go right into decision making. They had to go right into accepting this is what is, and creativity, innovation for the future.
Right.
Skipped all those steps, and guess what? The body keeps the score. So
Yeah.
the body doesn't lie. So someone who is leading all of a sudden will have a meltdown, will meltdown in front of their team or express anger, and it's not their nature. And so I just had to help leaders slow down and say, let's look at the grief and loss curve. Where are you? Oh, you skipped first four. Let's go back and let's give you some space to be angry, to be ticked off, to be depressed, to be disappointed, and to get the community and the resources you need. So getting them back to their own self-care, the whole illustration of when you're on a plane and the stewardess is saying, put the oxygen mask on you. Leaders don't do that often,
Right.
especially in crisis. First responders, Charles, we don't have time to put the mask on. It's go time. So as things started to kind of settle in, I really encourage everyone to go back to the beginning. Where are you at in grief and loss? Acknowledge that what you're feeling is grief. That's step number one. And then let's build a plan to support you physically, emotionally. Let's get you a support system. And let's begin to really think about what you can control. Because what happens with leaders is we get in our head of what we can't control. And that is what we would call ambiguous grief. We don't know the future. We don't know when we can go back to our normal lives, if they'll ever be normal. We don't know what our, third quarter, fourth quarter is going to look like. How do we budget? How do we, I work with people that are in SEO.
Yeah.
Their clients are so angry at them because they're not hitting their numbers. They're blaming their consultants and their SEO team because they're not producing a business result. So everyone's upset. Everyone's stressed. So helping everyone say, okay, what can you control? Maybe the only thing you can control today is what you eat for breakfast and making your bed.
Yeah.
Just back to basics. So as a therapist, as a leader, we have to go back to basics. And I just have to remind leaders and entrepreneurs all the time, you are human. Be human, and you go through grief. And while you can't maybe do it in public, let's get the support you need in private.
Yeah. You've been really good in trying to balance this. I know life is pretty crazy and there's a lot of demand on your time and your leadership. What are some things you do to create space, like practical things? Like, how do you breathe? How do you think about the future as a leader in the midst of everybody kind of clamoring and saying, hey, we need this, Angie. What do you think about that, Angie?
It is so true. Okay, so have you heard? It was a speech from I don't know who it was. Someone from the military that took over our presidency said that the hardest and worst job in America is a college president. Because you have so many constituents, you have so many people, from students to parents to donors to corporate sponsors. It just never ends. So thankfully, I'm an extrovert, so I kind of thrive on connection. But nothing could have prepared me for what we're experiencing today with COVID and all of the changes. So for me, I am an early riser. So I'm the best in the morning. So I've tried to keep that routine. I'm also about a 2 to 3 podcast person before I start my day. So, 20-minute. So Michael Hyatt, Brendan Bouchard, and whoever I can get to pump me up. And Michael Hyatt helps me think.
Mm-hmm.
Ed Milet helps motivate me, right? Brendan Bouchard makes me excited about being a high performer and implementing high performance habits. So I have not changed those routines.
Okay.
I think what's important is when we're home, our whole lives have changed. So I encourage people, stick to what you did before as much as you possibly can. So those podcasts, and Charles, not every day do I get time to myself. So sometimes for me in these days when I used to commute, I go for a drive. I implemented walks with my daughter and with our dog. just smelling the roses, feeling the air, because it can get very overwhelming. And I would say for the first time in about 10 weeks, tomorrow I've blocked out the whole day with nothing. I mean, and it's so hard for me to say no to people, but I've literally blocked the whole day wide open to think.
That's good.
The process. I
That's
deserve
great.
that, right? We have to as leaders, because then we can't lead well.
Yeah. So what's inspiring? This is my last question for you is, what's inspiring you these days and why? Like those podcasts are definitely fueling you. Are there things you're seeing where you're really moved during this time?
Mm-hmm. I'm always moved by people. I'm always moved by the beauty and the magic of human potential. I'm someone that I can't believe the blessing of being where I am in life, to have the amount of influence, to have the connections, to have the network, to be on a podcast, Charles, with you, my friend, and all to see what you've done in the world, and how much you've helped so many people, including myself and the university. I'm just so grateful. I'm so grateful for that. So I'm inspired by human potential, because I'm one who just thought small. I really thought small of myself and of what I could become. So what's inspiring me is the stories of human resilience.
Yeah.
On a funny note, John Krasinski is awesome. I watch him every time he posts because I need good news. But again, potential. Also, if you haven't seen it, probably every one of your listeners has seen it, but Becoming, Michelle Obama's documentary. I watched it twice last weekend, cried both times, because the inspiring message that no matter what is going on externally, you got to do your work.
Yeah.
And if they think you're invisible, if they think you're a statistic, but you believe you're something and you begin to assert yourself, you're going to flip the script. I love these girls gathered with Michelle, and they said, what do I do to not be a statistic? She said, believe in you. Believe in yourself. Do know you are important. And so to me, as a therapist, that speaks to me. It speaks to that inner locus of control that, life isn't happening to me, it's happening for me. And how can I choose to leverage the circumstances to grow, to be more, I'm made for more, and to bless and serve more people? That's so inspiring to me. That I can't get enough of that. I can't get enough of self-help and how to inspire people and inspire myself. Number two, the last thing, I can't say I'm really good with hobbies, Charles. I'm just such a people person, and I'm a workhorse. I love to innovate and create and plan and all the things. Very purpose-driven. But my husband is very purpose-driven. We're a value-driven home, but he is so smart, but so adventurous. He grew up in the mission field. He grew up in Panama, Central America. He loved to swim with sharks and cliff dive and all those things. So I'm like, safe. Let's be safe. I'll risk it relationally, but I'm going to stay physically safe. So let me tell you, he's about ready to become, he's working on becoming certified in sailing. And that's one of his bucket lists. He does a lot of bucket listing. So he kayaks, does all these things. So we're into sailing right now, apparently. So we watch a lot of sailing vlogs in YouTube, and it terrifies me, but it's outside of my comfort zone, and I'm being inspired. And all of a sudden I'm like, after next 10 years, let's live on a sailboat. Let's try. I mean, I'm getting inspired. So that's inspiring me. Sailing. Can you believe it? We'll see.
I love it. Well, it will be recorded on this podcast, so I will bring it back to you 10 years from now.
Come on.
To remind you of that commitment.
Yeah, we'll do a podcast from my sailboat.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, Angie, thank you so much for doing what you're doing right now, and also spending a few moments with our audience. Any final words of encouragement, or people listening in, trying to navigate even as a leader, or those who are parenting? What are some final thoughts that you have about our time?
Oh yeah. Okay. Well, I would just encourage y'all are doing great. I think give yourself more credit. I think we live with so much guilt and shame about we should be doing this. Take should, would have, could have out of your vocabulary. They're really words that aren't helpful. And control what you can. There's a lot we can't control. Put that aside and make this season the best season. I know that sounds absolutely absurd. You're like, Angie, how can we have the best season in shelter in place and with our kids underfoot? You know what? There's something for you in this time, and let it happen for you, not to you. So control what you can, let go of the rest, live your best life, drink that water, get that sleep, connect with people as much as you can, even if it's on Zoom. We need human connection. And remember, you're doing the best you can.
That's a good word. Well, thanks everyone for tuning in to the Ideation Podcast. You can find this on most podcast channels and also on YouTube and Facebook. Well, Angie, thanks so much for your time today.
Thank you, Charles.